Today, I want to talk about vehicles that were designed and built, but never actually turned a wheel in motorsport competition. That is, until they appeared in racing video games, and we were able to change that. Racing cars often garner a following because of success. Maybe it's their results, their longevity, the rivalries and competition at the time, or maybe it's their groundbreaking performance. But as much as these traits are admired and respected, we as humans love an underdog story. We love failure and perseverance. We love untapped potential and what could have beens. Throughout the history of motorsport, there have been more failures than successes, and occasionally even a project that never makes the grid. These leave us wondering, why did they fail, and how might it have changed the landscape if they did compete? Obviously, there are some questions that can be answered, and others that can't. But sim racing has a unique ability to humour our bursting curiosity, because in this video, I'm going to tell the story of 7 racing cars which were built but never actually raced. And importantly, all of them can be driven virtually. People love Scandinavian crime stories, so why don't we start with one? Swedish supercar manufacturer Koenigsegg only ever built one racing car, but it had the ingredients to be something pretty special. The fact that it never reached its intended destination of the Le Mans 24 Hour, or any other racing grid for that matter, is a crime of epic proportions. During breaks in production of its famous mid-noughties CCR and CCX supercars, the factory engineers chipped away at the creation of its first ever racing car. The intention? To go and take on Le Mans. The CCGT, as it would be called, was designed to the exact parameters of the ACO GT1 regulations at the time, optimising it for the class from the outset. Whilst based on the existing CCR, this racing monster was as light as a farmland landscape in winter and had a 5-litre V8 engine, far more capable than regulation allowed. Downforce and aerodynamic efficiency weren't concerns either, with its sleek shape, flat floor and advanced Venturi tunnels. The recipe was frightening. I mean, it may have already been a near 5-year-old project by the time it took to the tarmac for testing at Knutstorp in 2008. But this car had perfect dimensions. It had such a low weight figure they had to add ballast to reach the minimum regulations of weight for GT1 cars. It had lots and lots of power. They had to restrict it, again, to meet regulations. It wasn't underpowered as standard, and it also had incredibly advanced aerodynamics. So downforce wasn't going to be an issue either, and it had minimal drag. Time then for dreams to be crushed. Mere months later, the ACO and the FIA decided to tweak GT1 regulations. You know, nothing major, we're just going to ban carbon monocoques and up the annual production requirements for the car your GT1 is based on by around about 1600%. Considering the CCGT had a fully carbon fibre monocoque, and Koenigsegg being a relatively small company, built everything by hand, the car was essentially outlawed in an instant. It's such a sad story of untapped, wasted potential. This car could have been incredible, but thankfully, it's sort of been preserved in RaceRoom because you can buy this car for £3 rather than, I don't know, 3 million. It forms part of the GTR1 class, which is based pretty much on GT1 regulations, they just couldn't call it that. And it means you can experience all of the power, the excitement, the noise for yourself for a lot less money. I'm going to end this part on another positive note because, as of 2023, the Masters Historic Racing Organisation have actually permitted this car to race in one of its historic series, meaning that 2 decades after its inception, the Koenigsegg CCGT, the only ever official Koenigsegg racing car, could still make its racing debut. If the owner chooses to do so. Let's just hope, if that does happen, that they don't prang it. A new manufacturer entered the World Rally Championship in 2013, and it would change the sport in an instant. That manufacturer was Volkswagen, and with its new Polo R WRC, it would go on to take 43 overall wins in the next 53 rallies. Total domination for 4 years straight, after a decade of Sebastien Loeb and Citroën brilliance. 4 consecutive drivers' titles too, for the latest French superstar, Sebastien Ogier. It felt like we'd just witnessed a real-life Pokemon evolution. By the way, I did recently make a video about the 20 years of French WRC domination, so be sure to check that out later if you're interested. With Volkswagen, it looked as though history may be repeating itself, but would it match Citroen's longevity at the top? No, it wouldn't. Remember Dieselgate? Yeah, that was Volkswagen, and that began in late 2015. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story here, but basically, Volkswagen was the guilty culprit in a major emissions scandal. And as part of its attempt to recover its fairly substantial reputational damage, the company pulled out of all World Championship level motorsport activities. By the end of 2016, this meant the end of Audi's legendary LMP1 program, as it's owned by VW, and Volkswagen themselves' premature departure from the World Rally Championship. Like you would expect from any successful manufacturer at the highest levels of international motorsport, testing was well underway already for the 2017 WRC season. After all, there was a major regulation shift that year and a new era of car called WRC+. Therefore, Volkswagen, as the yardstick at the time, would have wanted to be as far ahead as possible to try and stay at the front. This was its creation, the Polo GTI WRC. It was developed throughout the 2016 season with the help of Finnish legend Marcus Gronholm, but obviously with VW's withdrawal, it would never actually compete. Ogier, who'd just won the last 4 championships with Volkswagen, swiftly moved to Ford, winning the next 2 championships, then immediately moved to Citroen, almost won another championship, and then Toyota, where he won 2 more championships. Could you imagine if the VW Polo had been even just a little bit competitive, anywhere near as competitive as its predecessor? Ogier might have won another 5 consecutive titles. It could have been 9 in a row for another Frenchman. Thankfully, this car has been preserved in EA Sports WRC, so you can compete in the Polo that never raced against the Fiesta that Ogier would end up driving instead, and the Citroen that he would drive a couple of years after that. And these WRC Plus cars, that regulation set from 2017 until 2021, honestly created just some of the most special rally cars. They are just sublime to drive. A bone-shattering experience. On the subject of bone-shattering brilliance, this next car might well be one of my favourite driving experiences in this video. In fact, it is probably number 1 for me, but the car isn't exactly a special story in itself. It's more just a sad reflection on the current state of Germany's premier national racing series. The DTM used to be an all bells and whistles playground for up-and-coming stars, an unofficial F1 retirement village, and the birthplace of touring car overkill and unsustainable expenditure. These machines are hugely desirable for sim racers. Their wailing engines, excessive power, and evil looks make them somewhat irresistible. It's therefore no surprise that RaceRoom's recent 1995 DTM DLC pack was such a popular one, and if you want the full story on those particular cars and tracks, make sure you check out our full video on them. Those mid-90 monsters were known as Class 1 touring cars, and they were unsustainable. It's why the cheaper, less extreme, less powerful Class 2 cars, more commonly known as Super Tourers, would outlive their bigger siblings, albeit meeting the same ultimate fate 4 years later. So when a new variant of the Class 1 rule set was introduced to the German DTM and the Japanese Super GT Championship in 2019, you would think some of the past lessons might have actually been learned. In DTM's case at least, these new-gen Class 1 rules lasted a mere 2 seasons. Both Audi and Aston Martin cited the excessive costs as the reason for their departure at the end of 2020. The third and final manufacturer, meanwhile, BMW, had already designed this new-look facelifted BMW M4 Class 1 in preparation for the 2021 season. But this wasn't enough to stop the DTM organisers from dropping the Class 1 rule set in favour of omnipresent GT3 cars. Thankfully, BMW had already been working with Studio 397 on bringing this new racer to rFactor 2, so despite this visceral monster never seeing the light of day in reality, we could all experience it on the sim at least, and it is a joy to haul around.
If you enjoy watching sim racing content on YouTube or just general gaming videos, perhaps you want to have a go at creating some for yourself. This is where Elgato steps in. It has an incredible range of streaming and video production products like capture cards, webcams, microphones, cam links, green screens, anything you can think of that's going to help you with your video production and streaming, Elgato probably has a product. Just make sure you check out the affiliate link down in the description below. By doing so, you'll be able to buy those products, and also Traxion will get a little bit of assistance and support from that as well.
1,000 brake horsepower from a 5-litre twin-turbocharged V8 and a weight of just 620 kilograms. That is a scary combination by today's standards, so imagine how it must have looked in 1970, when safety was an afterthought and aerodynamic development was still in its infancy. Unfortunately then, this next story is as deadly as it first appears. This wasn't a project cancelled by paperwork or rule changes, rather by tragedy. Sports car racing during this era was quite simply wild. The restrictions applied to the cars were as effective as a locked gate in the middle of a field without a fence. The cars were mental, overpowered for their time and with very little in the way of protection or driver aids. A Japanese company called Toyota, who were growing in global stature at the time, wanted a slice of the pie, and having tested the waters with their 2000 GT at the 1966 Japanese Grand Prix, which was for sports cars at the time, not Formula 1, they began working on their first ever purpose-built racer. The Toyota 7 took multiple forms between 1967 and 69, but it just wasn't powerful enough to compete with the competition from rivals Nissan. To solve this, Toyota went all in with its 578A iteration, creating an 800 plus brake horsepower, turbocharged steel space frame rocket ship. It was small, light, and cut through the air like a shun knife through tuna. You could certainly make the case that in 1970, this was the fastest racing car on the planet. That speed, of course, came with risk, and throughout its development program, there would be 3 major incidents involving 3 different iterations of the Toyota 7. The second of these would claim the life of star driver Sachio Fukuzawa, and then the third in 1970 would prove fatal yet again, this time another leading factory driver, Minoru Kawai, driving the 578A turbocharged 7, which by this stage had a purported 1,000 brake horsepower. Toyota had intended to enter the car in the 1971 Can-Am series, following the cancellation of the Japanese Grand Prix. These accidents and the controversy surrounding them put paid to those plans. The death of Kawai was the final straw, and Toyota withdrew from motorsport. This car is extremely familiar to me, and many others I'm sure, thanks to its inclusion in Gran Turismo 4. I did always wonder growing up how a car that old was able to be so quick. I just assumed it was a wacky concept or something. It's mad to think that this actually existed, and the potential speed was awesome. It's just a shame that safety standards were too far behind engineering advancements at the time. One of these cars does still exist, by the way, on display at Toyota's museum in Nagakute. I would love this car to return to the Gran Turismo series, maybe as a GT7 update, or maybe even in GT8, because we haven't actually seen it since Gran Turismo 6. But it truly encapsulates the very best and very worst of motorsport, an ominous and bittersweet piece of history. With lessons learned and the healing properties of time, Toyota returned to motorsport prominence later in the 70s. A big part of this would be in relation to rallying, and as you might well know, eventually Toyota would go on to have huge success in the sport. It's recently picked up numerous WRC drivers and manufacturers titles with its Yaris, and in the 1990s, similar success with its various Group A Celica iterations. But perhaps, if history had played out a little differently, World Rally Championships could have come much sooner. Toyota's Group B Celica of the mid-80s had one major flaw. It was rear-wheel drive, and in a world dominated by four-wheel drive Peugeots, Audis and Lancias, its only wins came in attrition-based events, such as the Safari Rally. This was a company with a lot of money and a will to succeed, so the obvious answer was to sink resources into a brand new four-wheel drive machine. Toyota elected to use the recently released first-generation MR2 as its base this time, due to its relative athleticism, shorter wheelbase and mid-engine layout. And this car would be built to the upcoming Group S regulations, set to replace Group B regulations heading into 1987. Now, I could do a whole video about Group S alone, but these were essentially Group B cars turned up to 11. These cars were to be more boisterous, because Group B was just a little bit dull and slow, you know? Yeah, you can probably see where this is going. Inevitably, Group S never saw the light of day. Following the tragic 1986 WRC campaign, the more pragmatic Group A rule set would come into effect instead. This was actually pretty devastating for Toyota, who had finally created a rally beast that could take on the very best. I say could, it wasn't super simple. When this car was built, test driver Ove Andersson took it out and described it as terrifying to drive. He actually also said he was relieved that the Group S regulations had been scrapped. And when you consider, these cars had about 750 horsepower, weighed about 750 kilograms, and were being fired through muddy forests at night in the damp, it's not really that surprising, is it? This game I'm playing right now, by the way, you may not recognise it, it's Sebastien Loeb Rally Evo, and honestly, it's a bit of a hidden gem. It came out in 2016. It actually looks really, really good even by today's standards. Unfortunately, wheel support's not that great, but hopefully your older wheel might work with it, unlike my SimuCube here. Now, the reason I'm playing this game for the first time in many years is because they actually released a DLC pack specifically dedicated to Group S machinery. So, yes, there was this Toyota 222B, but there was also the Lancia ECV, which was going to replace the Delta S4, and that was another rally car that never actually raced. There was also the slightly more level-headed Vauxhall Astra 4S, and the bizarre-looking Peugeot Quasar? Maybe they were just trying to rhyme with bizarre. Anyway, that's a really interesting concept car, definitely worth looking into, and it's another car you can drive on this very game. I am delighted that this DLC exists. I'm really looking forward to giving it a go again with a proper steering wheel at some point, if I can ever work out how to get it working. I do feel like Group S is heavily underrepresented in racing games and sim racing. Perhaps something that can be addressed by EA Sports WRC, maybe? Please? Thankfully, underrepresentation in racing games isn't an issue by any stretch when it comes to GT1 cars. In fact, this car might just be the most widely recognised car of all of the cars from this video. You may have come across it playing Forza Horizon, or like myself, Project Gotham Racing 3, maybe, who knows. But what I would say is the version here on Project Cars 2 is probably the one that handles the best and looks the best, even if it doesn't sound the best. Meet the Ferrari F50 GT. Now, in my opinion, the standard F50, if you can call it standard in any way, is genuinely exceedingly ugly. I mean, not everyone agrees with that. It's certainly up for debate, but I've always thought the F50 was an ugly car. For some reason though, this GT1 version, the F50 GT, is somehow gorgeous. It's just superb, and I don't know how that is. It's amazing how little subtle aerodynamic tweaks here and there, different wheels for example, different rear wing. It's amazing how much of a difference it can actually make to the aesthetics of a car. Do forgive me for this, by the way, but if there's any excuse to talk about GT1 cars in this channel, I'm grabbing it with both hands. Ferrari were already on the back foot with their F40 LM and GTE in the mid-90s. It was a stunning GT racer with the cleanest of intentions. This wasn't some sort of homologation special, this was a racing version of an existing road car. So too, however, was the thorn in its side, the faster, angrier, more purposeful McLaren F1 GTR. And this McLaren was just too good and too modern for Ferraris to cope with in competition. Thankfully, the solution was staring them in the face, the brand new F50. Ferrari once again turned to Michelotto for its development, who along with Dallara created the all-improved F50 GT. With a V12 engine derived from the one fitted to their 1990 Formula 1 car, this was powerful, loud, and importantly, fast. So fast, in fact, it was outpacing the Ferrari 333 SP prototype during testing. But all of this was to no avail, because of some clever Porsche rule interpretations. Whilst the McLaren and the Ferrari were genuine road cars turned into racing cars, Porsche went about things in reverse. They designed a racing car, and then built road car versions of it to meet production regulations. A homologation special. Ferrari's attempts to get the 911 GT1 banned proved fruitless, and realising their F50 GT was going to be pretty uncompetitive from the get-go, they decided to can the project and put all of their resources instead into the re-burgeoning F1 effort. After all, the Ferrari F1 team had just signed star driver Michael Schumacher for 1996. In hindsight, this would prove to be, well, the right decision, because Ferrari had an incredible run throughout the early noughties with Michael Schumacher. But it's still sad that we never got to see this car in action. I mean, who doesn't love seeing another screaming V12 gorgeous midfield Ferrari? I would just love it though if this Project Cars 2 version sounded as good as the real thing, because it just doesn't. Let's end this with the oldest car of the lot, another where only one genuine version ever existed and still exists to this day, sort of. And another that can be experienced today thanks to Gran Turismo. if you're rich. We all remember the Ford versus Ferrari fight at Le Mans during the late 60s. But do you remember Jaguar being in amongst the thick of the action as well? Nope, me neither. Because they weren't. Jaguar had plenty of Sarth success a decade prior, the British marque taking 3 consecutive wins from 1955 to 1957 with its D-Type. And whilst the revered E-Type was a class winner and fabled sports car, Jaguar wanted another taste of overall victory. It set to work on the development of the XJ13 prototype. There was, however, a problem. The problem wasn't Ford, it wasn't Ferrari, it was Jaguar itself. The company was going through fairly significant restructuring at the time, as in 1966 it merged with the British Motor Corporation known as BMC. Whilst the designers working on the XJ13 were significantly invested in its creation, it was of less importance to Jaguar as a whole, and this created some roadblocks. For example, certain company higher-ups wanted to keep its V12 engine a secret until it appeared in a road car, but that wasn't going to be for another 5 years. In motorsport, you can't really afford to hedge your bets. A half-hearted commitment rather than a full-blown plunge results in failure more often than not. And with the car still in the early phases of testing, whilst Ford and Ferrari were out winning the Le Mans 24 Hours, Jaguar were a day late and several $1,000s short. Yes, the one-off car was a work of art until it was destroyed in a Myra testing crash in 1971, but it had already missed its true chance of success. Despite numerous replicas being built over the year, only one true car still exists, and even that wasn't rebuilt to the exact original spec after the crash at Myra. Thankfully, however, Gran Turismo 7 does still have the original. You just need to save up 12 million credits and be patient enough not to spend it as you wait for the Jag to appear in the market. Every unsuccessful racing car or development project, whatever the reason for its demise, teaches valuable lessons, but also tells a story. In some ways, a more enticing, engaging story than one of success. As humans, we're drawn to this sort of thing. We love an underdog, a backmarker, a rarity. And we love to imagine how iconic motorsport eras might have looked different had some of these premature projects actually seen the light of day. Although that simply isn't possible, we can at least experience through racing games what that might have looked like, felt like, and sounded like. And that's one of the things we love about them. Thanks as always for watching, and do let us know down in the comments below which of these cars is your favourite, or if there are any other abandoned racing projects that spring to mind. If you've enjoyed the video, hit that like button and subscribe for more of the same in future. But until then, I hope you have a great day.